On this episode, we are going to talk about the colonialist and white supremacist roots of institutions of higher education, both in this country and all over the world, specifically universities and museums. Now, this may seem like it's out of place and compared to the last two episodes that I have uploaded, but I swear there's a connection. Hang on, follow me. So, institutions of higher education, they all started out as public in the sense that you can go into an apprenticeship, you can go to learn the family trade, you can pick up a skill, or if you wanted to go into what was considered a higher profession, such as learning medicine or law, you would go to universities. And in the beginning, attending such universities were free. You only had to pay fees for your textbooks, for your supplies, and if needed, your uniforms. But other than that, learning was free because learning was for the sake of learning, not for the sake of creating a capitalistic workforce. It's if you wanted to learn these things, and if these people who have done this and practiced this for years want to profess, aka teach, then we will provide the space. Nowadays, it is a symbol of white supremacy, it's a symbol of elitism, it is a symbol of capitalism. For instance, the university, MIT in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, everybody knows, it's an open secret that university and Caltech over in California are like churners and producers of people who work for the Department of Defense and for the State Department and for the Department of Justice and the DHS and all the other alphabets like CIA, NSA, DEA, all of them. They come from MIT, they come from Caltech, they come from Annapolis, they come from Westport, and of course they come from like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. It's a known open secret. But what a lot of people do not know is what lies beneath a lot of those universities. And so we're going to talk about Columbia University because this is where the entirety of the student campus rebellion began. It began at Columbia University. There is a location on campus, on the Columbia University campus in particular, that was legitimately built on top of it's hard for me to talk about this because it's just insane, but it's built on top of a site for the enslaved, for the African enslaved in New York. And there is no monument there on the site telling what the site used to be. So you only know if you know. You only know if you do the research. Now, I am a researcher. I'm an academic. I am an archaeologist. So I know that even though there is no monument, there's no placard detailing the site, all you would have to do is reach out to the GSA or the General Services Administration for the U.S. government. They handle all of these things. So even though there's no site, there's no placard listing what is there, the records are within the GSA. They have them. So we know what's underneath there. So to have what is essentially is a revolt, the birth of an uprising, begin on that very site, it's beyond coming full circle. Beyond full circle. Segueing this into talking about museums, there is an issue with the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History down in DC. What's the issue, have you? Well, how much time do you have? Aside from having admitted to being in current possession of stolen Benin bronzes from the Benin Kingdom, which is in Nigeria, modern-day Nigeria, they also currently have physical remains of Indigenous and African Americans either on display or within their storage coffers. Now let me just paint this picture for you. Your ancestor from the 1700s passed away. They lived until 45, 53 years old. That's about as far as that medicine at that time would get you. So they lived that long, and they were buried peaceably, modestly, most likely on the ground of a property that they owned, if not in a public cemetery. And then here comes a museum, of American history, the Smithsonian, and they hire archaeologists like myself to conduct surveys and conduct researches and field work to see if there's anything to find within a certain location and area surrounding that location. And so you do your little research, you use your GIS, you use your LiDAR, and you find something. You end up coming across, the remnants of a house basement or the foundation. And within said basement slash foundation, you find the remains of someone's 1700s ancestors. Instead of leaving that discovery in situ, and getting as much analysis and information as you can while the remains are in situ, and in situ means right where it is, undisturbed, untouched, in its full context. You should be able to do that without removing the remains, because after that it becomes a point of desecration. Now, here's where white supremacy figures into all of this. Because if it's a white person whom you end up uncovering, it becomes desecration of a body. But if the person that you discover through DNA extraction and analysis is determined to not be white, then the recovery and the uncovering of those remains become something that needs to be studied, preserved, and conserved for science. Like, why is my black ancestor your brown ancestor? This person's indigenous ancestor, something or someone that needs to be dug up, conserved, preserved in a museum for science. But if you end up coming across somebody's white 3 times great grandma, it's desecration of a body. Like, how? Where the fuck do you get off making that determination? That came to consensus in the federal court in 1990 with Kennewick Man, the Kennewick Man case. It was a hiker who was hiking in, of course, the Kennewick area of Washington State, and they came across a set of remains hidden, within the rocks and the boulders of the hiking trail. And so, bodies were uncovered through forensic archaeologists, forensic anthropologists, crime scene investigators, the whole team. So they come and they remove the remains from their in situ context. And they take them to a lab because they want to figure out if that person died recently, if there was a crime, all that happening. Through all of this investigation, the local Kennewick tribe has been telling these people, this is our ancestor. Please give them back to us so we can give them a proper sacred burial. And the scientists were like, well, no, not until we're done investigating and analyzing, because we need to conserve and preserve your cultural heritage for the future. It's like, what kind of balls did you grow to look someone in the eye and tell them basically that you feel that they are incapable of caring for their own ancestors, their own tangible heritage, and that you will do a better job than they do, and that they just need to suck it up? Like, that pisses me off so bad. It is so insensitive, and it's highly racist. It's to assume that because they are indigenous, they don't know how to preserve their own things, when in fact they do. They know exactly how to preserve their heritage. As long as white people get out of the freaking way, they know exactly what to do and how to do it, and they're successful at it. They are successful at it. We still have those pueblos carved out of the sides of mountains in southwestern USA that have been around for thousands of years because they are successful at what they do. They know what they're doing. And so it goes back and forth in the courts. Meanwhile, the judge is trying to say, on top of that, that the person that they recovered is white Eurocentric when they weren't. But that was the racial bias, that that person was of European descent, and it couldn't have been someone indigenous, and therefore the indigenous people had no claim to them. The Kennewick tribe had no claim. But lo and behold, there were some anthropologists and academics who came out on the side of the tribe and said, you can't just tell them and assume that the remains that you found are of a white person or a non-indigenous person. You have to test that since you have the remains with you. And that is what they did. So they went through all sorts of testing and they found out what? That not only was the remains about just under 10,000 years old, but they were indeed indigenous to the Kennewick area and the Kennewick tribe. And this case went back and forth in the courts for 5 years. No, not actually 5 years. I think it was 20 years. Yeah, 20 years that it went back and forth until they were finally able to get the remains back and give them a proper reinterment. And I had to write about this case for my Archaeology 101 final project, I think. Like final essay, final thing to turn in. And the goal was to choose the side of the academic or to choose the side of the tribe. And after doing everything that I did with all the research, annotation, with every bit of evidence that I provided, I wrote that there was no way that I could choose a side because who am I? And I said, who am I? Instead of who the fuck am I to tell someone that because of their heritage, that their person's ancestors, that their ancestry is something that we have to dig up, that we have to preserve, that we have to be the ones to tell the world about who you are. Why can't we just equip them to be able to do it themselves versus thinking that we know better? We don't. And I got an A on that paper. So, final paper, there we go. Brains everywhere, but I got an A on that paper, and it's one of the most proudest points of my research because it's like, how can we be the ones to think that we can go up to a person who was indigenous to the land that this country was hijacked and then built upon and go, we know better than you? No, the fuck we don't. We don't. And it's like, that's kind of what Columbia University is doing with trying to disband these encampments. They're trying to tell the students, we know better than you. No, you don't. You are fighting Palestinian American students, Iranian American, Jewish American, Islamic American, Black American. You are fighting students who literally have skin in the game, who know people, who have been directly affected, if not harmed and killed by the IDF and the IOF. You do not know more than they do. You refuse to know more than they do because you get your blood money from Israel. So therefore, you're not going to listen to anyone else. You're willing to commit treason, to enact laws on behalf of a foreign entity or government. Which is treason? You are willing to commit treason just so you can keep your blood money. And you're upset that these kids are all like, not on my watch. Trust me, Columbia University, you're already currently being sued for doing what you did. And when those kids win that lawsuit, and when the Columbia University president is out her for a job, rightfully so, this will be a ripple effect, a domino effect all around the country, in the world. We mean business. Back away. Divest, divest, divest. Sanction, sanction, sanction. Boycott, boycott, boycott. Because if not, we will boycott, sanction, and divest from you. And as I end this episode, I want to leave you with the words from Professor Ruha Benjamin from Spelman College in Atlanta when she was quoting the speech in the poem Black Faces in High Places. And she ended her speech with this: Black faces in high places will not save us. We have to be the ones to save ourselves. Thank you, and see you next time.